Alright, today we have a spooky data mine. It's starting to become a yearly habit for Azur Lane that on Halloween week we are going to have Tempesta's event. Tempesta being a pirate faction with sailing frigates. I actually really like this little tradition. Believe it or not, even though this isn't a UR event, this was one of my most anticipated events of the year. And that's even as the last collab event got me to rewatch all of Is It Wrong to Try to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon. I mean, how can I not like these Tempesta events? They have real ships. Pay no mind to the fact that they may be from the golden age of piracy instead of the World War II era, and their cats are based on historical pirates. Their kits are usually pretty fun and have a lot of synergy, but I'll stop gushing over this faction and get into today's update. The new event today is called Tempesta and Islas de Libertád. It's actually an extremely exciting event because after this event will be the first time ever in Azur Lane's history that you'll be able to field a full Tempesta fleet that is SR rarity. At the same time that this event is ongoing, we'll actually be rerunning last year's Tempesta event. This means there will be 2 simultaneous banners. The event shop will actually be shared, similar to how last year shared with the prior year, and the map will be in a very familiar format. There will be maps T1 through T6, and most importantly, there will be equipment drops for sailing frigates in T5 and T6. T5 will drop the old Demi Cannon, which is the SR battleship gun for sailing frigates, and T6 will drop the old Heavy Cannon, which is the SR destroyer gun for sailing frigates. If you ever want to effectively use Tempesta fleets, grind these maps a lot. Who knew? These pirate ships of the line need a lot of cannons. Also, as with every event, we're going to get new skins. All the new ships are going to get new skins, 2 L2Ds, 2 dynamics, and 1 static. And then we're going to get 3 additional skins for Kronstadt, Izumo, and Harutsuki. Let me know in the comments which skins you're buying, if any. We also get a new equipment this update. It is an elite auxiliary item that goes by the name Invitation to Islas de Libertád. This should be an extremely easy equipment to pick up because you just have to finish the event story to obtain it. It gives 500 HP, which is standard for an elite auxiliary item, but it has an interesting skill. When equipped by a Tempesta ship, that ship gets plus 5% efficiency to their slot 1 equipment. This actually seems pretty useful. Those extra efficiencies are very good. It is a little bit unfortunate that that skill is actually better on some main fleet ships, because those main fleet ships are typically not going to want 500 HP. They'd rather have firepower or hit stat. So it may be better equipped on a Vanguard ship for the HP boost, but you also want to make sure that you're getting max value out of that skill, so maybe you want to equip it on a ship with a main gun +1 like Golden Hind. Overall, this is a very powerful equipment if you're using Tempesta ships. Tempesta ships are actually quite limited in the equipment that they can use. That equipment is certainly not as power crept as the other types of equipment in the game, so I anticipate that this item will actually be used in Tempesta fleets. There's not as much competition going on for slots, and this is a fairly good item. I'm going to deem it as a must pick up for those who want to play Tempesta fleets, although it's trivially easy to get. Also, as part of this event, we're going to be getting brand new Meowfficers. Past event exclusive Meowfficers like Drake, Kid, and Bellamy are going to be added permanently to the core data shop, so if you missed those, you'll have another chance to get them. Man, we're running out of cat space fast. So let's talk about the 2 new cats. Like past event exclusive Meowfficers, all of their talents are going to be strictly locked, so you don't have to reroll for them. This is a blessing and a curse. Mostly a blessing, though. So the elite cat is called Bonnet. Its talents seem to be oriented towards overall survivability and cruiser damage. Its skills technically lock it to being a staff cat, which is interesting because the staff slot has more competition than the other one. However, skill 1 and 2 are not that good. Skill 3 is interesting because it actually provides you a heal, a significant heal. However, Every from last year actually provides a heal, and the cat Every is better in basically every way, so I don't anticipate using this cat ever. However, our other new Meowfficer today is Teach, which is an SR cat. Her talents are relatively similar to the other SR Tempesta Meowfficers, with one notable exception. This cat's talents specialize in carrier stats? That is oddly unique and specific. That fact alone may carve out this cat's own specific niche. Its skills are pretty good too. I see you there adding hit stat to carriers. Interestingly enough, its third skill pairs with Queen Anne's Revenge, which is one of the new ships coming today. It triggers a special barrage, so we'll have to see how that works with her when we talk about that ship specifically. However, it does kind of go counterproductive because generally I would think for Teach you'd want to have a aircraft carrier backline and maybe use Tempesta girls in the front. But a lot of people are using these cats outside of Tempesta fleets. She's not really locked into a Tempesta fleet outside of the Queen Anne's Revenge barrage. And while she might not be the very best theoretical cat in her field, she has a very low investment to get in near perfect talents. New players will definitely like this cat for their aviation fleets, and then they don't have to level up the other cats. This is very typical of Tempesta cats because they have locked talents, and those talents are good. New players who don't have to re-roll the talents with all that gold are going to be able to just slot these in nice and easy. I still think the best Meowfficer for Tempesta is Every, and then there's going to be some debate whether you want to use Kid, Drake, or Teach for that second slot in a Tempesta-only fleet. If you're talking about supplementing one of these Tempesta Meowfficers for other cats because you haven't upgraded those cats to be near perfect, then she fits into her slot quite nicely. It's important to note she is not locked to the staff slot like a lot of the other cats, so she can go in that main slot, which is very nice and useful. This is generally a very good cat. Both these cats are going to be obtainable in the event shop, so if you play the event, they should be relatively free to obtain. Make sure you pick up these cats. More specifically, make sure you pick up Teach. Spend your event points, get Teach. Alright, with equipment and cats out of the way, let's get into the actual event ships. Before we do that though, we do have to talk about Augment Modules. All of the new ships are going to get brand new exclusive Augment Modules. But you know who didn't get an Augment Module? Royal Fortune is still Augment Moduleless. Because she doesn't have her own exclusive version and she's a Sailing Frigate, she's the only ship in the game that cannot equip any Augment Modules, which is a fun little quirk. Maybe next year. Like normally when we get these new special Augment Modules on release of a ship, you are going to definitely equip these Augment Modules guaranteed. These Augment Modules are going to be permanently available, so they should have no option for you to not get them. You should spend and invest in getting these equipped on the Tempesta ships that you're using. They are so good and strictly better than their base forms. And so when I talk about the ships and their skills, I'm literally going to consider that the skills are upgraded by the Augment Modules. I will briefly put them on screen here so you can see the stat boosts they give and compare them to the other alternative Augment Modules. Like the Tempesta events, a lot of these are getting huge aviation damage taken. This is because Tempesta ships in general don't have any anti-air because they are sailing frigates, but obviously you need anti-air to be competitive in most of the maps in this World War II era, so the Augment Module basically fixes that by giving these aviation damage reductions instead of anti-air. But that's the only I'm going to talk about is the Augment Modules. The rest are going to be just baked into the actual ship conversation. I'm going to just read the upgraded skill descriptions. Just use the Augment Modules, please. So the first ship that I want to talk about today is Queen Anne's Revenge. She's an SR Tempesta sailing frigate, and most importantly, she is a main fleet sailing frigate. So finally another backliner for this faction. Stat-wise, she actually looks like a slightly power-crept version of the other SR main fleet sailing frigates. She's probably closest to Ganjisawa. However, she does have more firepower stat and an extra 5% main gun efficiency. Her biggest difference from all of the other sailing frigates is probably her evasion. She has 62 evasion, where most main fleet sailing frigates are somewhere around 36. So stats alone, she's probably the most powerful main fleet sailing frigate to date. So let's move on to skills. Skill number 1. If this ship is the flagship, all of your Tempesta ships get plus 10% firepower, hit stat, and evasion stat. Otherwise, she alone gets plus 15% firepower and evasion stat. So this is great. Tempesta finally gets a faction buffer. She does lock herself to the flagship position, but these are sizable buffs that you'll definitely want in a full Tempesta fleet, no doubt. It is interesting though, if she's alone without any other Tempesta, she actually gets a higher firepower buff. So this is interesting when you consider it with the Meowfficer and her getting the extra barrage from the Meowfficer if she's in it, and you just throw her in the fleet with 5 other normal ships. So she looks pretty good right off the bat because this skill is going to benefit her whether she's just a one-off thrown in your normal fleet or whether she's the leader of your Tempesta fleet. Also, when this ship fires her main guns, she's going to have a 70% chance chance to trigger a special barrage. If there are other Tempesta ships in the fleet, that is going to be a 100% chance. This barrage is okay. It doesn't do a ton of damage. It's not any special type of ammo. It does have priority aim, so that's good, but it's just a mediocre barrage. The interesting part here is there is a lot of incentive to throwing her in a Tempesta fleet because you want to trigger that barrage guaranteed and get that extra DPS. However, the actual game right now is actually checking whether she's a flagship or not for whether or not she gets the increased 30% chance to trigger. So then you don't have to put other Tempesta ships with her to get that. But that is just currently a difference between the game text and the game code. At some point, those should hopefully align. I'm inclined to think that the text is correct and the code is wrong, but they'll probably have an update, and I'll probably put something in the pinned comments when they fix that. Her second skill is the one that is upgraded by her unique Augment module, and it reads, when the ship's main gun finishes loading, if no enemy afloat has the plunder target inflicted on an enemy, it prioritizes elite enemies. When it gets this inflicted status, it's going to be slowed by 20% for 5 seconds. That's really nice because that happens when she's finished loading, so it's right before she triggers her firing salvo, which will also trigger her barrage, so we will have an enemy that's a little bit slowed and easier to hit. Enemies with the plunder target status are also going to get minus 10% evasion stat, and Queen Anne's Revenge is going to deal 10% more damage to ships with that status. So that's going to help improve your effective damage output when you load those salvos. Additionally, when an enemy with the plunder target is sunk, all of your Tempesta ships are going to heal 3% of max HP, and they're going to take 3% less damage for the rest of the battle. Now that stacks a max of 3 times, so the damage reduction is capped at 9%. So in addition to giving stats to the whole faction, she's actually going to be a full faction heal, which is really powerful. She should effectively give this plunder target status every time she's reloading her main guns. And unless this is a boss fight where there is nothing dying, that should die and you should get the heal. So that's quite a bit of healing over the course of a mob fleet fight. So that's Queen Anne's Revenge. She's actually really exciting, looks very good. Her stats are slightly power creeping over the previous versions of Tempesta sailing frigates in the main fleet. She's got great skills, a lot of synergy. We finally have a Tempesta faction leader here, very clear. She gets slotted in immediately. She's got a lot of cool stuff going for her. Actually, her evasion is kind of crazy high. Interesting to note is she is light armor. Now that's pretty typical. All of the sailing frigates are light armor. However, the other sailing frigates in the main fleet, like Ganji Sawa and Sao Martino, actually have skills that upgrade that armor type to medium armor. I don't see one here, so she's going to stay locked in light armor, which means I guess she can't get torpedoed very easily, but generally is not going to be considered great. Overall, I really like what I'm seeing out of her. I think she's a must pick up, and that's even if you're not using her in a core Tempesta fleet, because she can work and operate outside of that. She also pairs with the Meowfficer and for the barrage, so like she has some utility there, but obviously she's meant to be a Tempesta fleet faction leader, and I don't know how you would run a Tempesta faction without her, given the way that she is. She looks like the most powerful Tempesta ship to date. So next up we have another SR main fleet sailing frigate. We've had 2 SR main fleet sailing frigates up until today for the whole history of the game, and we're getting 2 of them today. We're literally doubling. This one goes by the name Pearl. Stat-wise, she's slightly less impressive than Queen Anne's Revenge. She has the lowest HP of any of the SR main fleet sailing frigates. Her firepower is alright. It's very much on par with Ganji Sawa. She also has 115% main gun efficiency instead of the 110% main gun efficiency that older Tempesta ships have. Stat-wise, I'd put her almost perfectly even with Ganji Sawa. That's going to be slightly below Queen Anne's Revenge, but definitely above Sao Martino. Also, something to note, since she has lower EHP than a lot of the other main fleet sailing frigates, is that her Augment module only gives her minus 20% aviation damage taken reduction, whereas Queen Anne's Revenge gives minus 30%. That seems odd to me. Queen Anne's gives a damage dealt, but Pearl is going to give a heal, so maybe they're compensating for getting the heal at 40 seconds by giving her less damage taken reduction. But that basically just kind of feeds into the fact that that she feels like she's going to be less survivable than a lot of these other sailing frigates. Let's move on to the skills. Skill number 1, she gets plus 20% firepower and reload. That stat is actually boosted by the Augment Module. It's actually pretty good compared to her like ships that usually get 10% boosts. When this ship fires her main gun, she's going to trigger her special barrage, so she's going to act like a barrage battleship in a way. Enemies hit by this barrage are going to be inflicted by moonlight, which is going to give them minus 15% hit stat for the rest of the battle, but it does not stack. This barrage is not that good. It's actually weaker than Queen Anne's Revenge. It does have a chance to burn because it's HE ammo, but generally it's going to be doing less damage than Queen Anne's Revenge, so not that exciting. Also, 30 seconds after the start of the battle, she's going to get plus 15% damage dealt for the rest of the battle. Obviously, damage dealt increases are great, but 30 seconds into the battle is a little bit late. It's even after her firing her first main gun shot, so I'm not too excited about that. Let's move on to skill number 2. When this ship fires an odd number salvo, all Vanguard fleets get minus 10% damage taken for 8 seconds, and when this ship fires an even number salvo, she's going to heal herself 3% of her max HP, and then deal a flat static 500 damage to all Moonlight enemies. So those are the ones that have been hit by her barrage in skill number 1. And that's it. That's the only 2 skills she has. Man, does she feel so lackluster. This feels like a collection only ship. It almost feels like an elite ship. Kind of crazy. I mean, you obviously want to pick her up because if you are going to run a Tempesta fleet, you're going to need all of the sailing frigate tech that you can have. There's not a lot of ways to get fleet tech, so she obviously gives you fleet tech and you want that. However, there are currently 4 SR main fleet sailing frigates in the game, and you can obviously only run 3 in a single fleet, and I think this one is the ship that's left out. Queen Anne is a lock. San Martino is weaker than the other 2, however, she buffs the whole faction, and she has a cooldown reduction which helps speed up the damage and spread out your damage schedule. So that means that Pearl would have to compete with Ganji Sawa for that 3rd slot. However, Ganji Sawa's heal actually also benefits the Vanguard fleet, and she has better timing with her skills, giving her boosts at the right time. Pearl definitely comes in as a disappointment. Alright, the 3rd and final SR from today's event is going to be Lyme. She was the one that was provided in the spoiler leaks in the live stream. She also is going to be a Vanguard sailing frigate. She is the 3rd SR Vanguard sailing frigate in the game, so now we can finally complete the Vanguard fleet for Tempesta. I mean, technically, yes, elites do exist. Maybe. Stat-wise, she feels very much like Fancy. She does get a buff to her firepower and her health stat, but a reduction in her evasion stat. Most importantly, though, she does not have a main gun +1 like Golden Hind or Portsmouth Adventure, so that's something to keep in mind. One of the reasons why Fancy is maybe not used as much as Golden Hind, despite having better stats. Moving on to the skills. Skill number 1, she gets plus 15% firepower and hit stat. Also, she's going to get plus 20% damage dealt raw to enemies whose HP is under 25%. That's an interesting overkill mechanic. Not necessarily that good, but interesting. Every 5 seconds, she's going to fire a special bullet. This is a single HE bullet with priority aim that ignores shields. Not too shabby, to be honest. And then every 20 seconds, she's going to fire a special barrage. Now, this is an interesting barrage. It has a ton of shrapnel. If you calculate the theoretical damage this could do, it's enormous, but it is unaimed damage, and the shrapnel looks kind of weird. The way that it interacts has very small ranges, so a lot of this damage might actually miss, but theoretically, there's a lot of damage potential in this barrage. Skill number 2 is upgraded by her Augment Module. Her Augment Module is actually going to give her quite a bit of survivability by reducing damage taken, both aviation damage taken and then a broad universal damage taken, so that's kind of nice. Skill number 2 reads, plus 15% evasion stat, and she does plus 10% damage dealt to medium armor enemies. At the start of the battle, she's going to gain a barrier that is 15% of her max HP, and it lasts until the end of the battle. This is actually a pretty significant shield if we're talking about it, and it's guaranteed and it comes right at the start. Finally, when she takes fatal damage, she's going to avoid sinking and then become invincible for 5 seconds. After she's done being invincible, she's going to heal 20% of her max HP, and then she gets plus 10% damage dealt and minus 15% damage taken for the rest of the battle. This triggers once per battle. Okay, that's a really good survivability invincibility skill. Like, the invulnerability there is great. It really helps. Man, is she a tank. I think she's probably probably going to be the frontmost Vanguard ship for Tempesta fleets because she has the basically invincibility skill, she's got the shield, she's got a pretty good sizable HP pool, and yeah, we very much like that. Once again, she does not have anything that changes her out of light armor, which is kind of interesting since we did have a couple skills last time that changed people into medium armor, but all of our SR sailing frigates are going to stay in their light armor. And yeah, so I really think that this ship's really powerful. She also has an all-out assault that is HE, and it triggers every 20 main gun shots. And while that does sound like a long time, it actually does count both of her destroyer guns. So she has 2 destroyer gun slots. Neither of those slots are main gun +1s, but both of them are counting towards her all-out assault, so that's something special for this sailing frigate. So overall, Lyme looks pretty good. Not necessarily as good as Queen Anne's Revenge looked when I first looked at her, but she is a solid ship. She kind of has a kit that's geared towards tankiness, or at least as tanky as Tempesta ship girls can get, and I think you are going to slot her into the main Tempesta fleet. I'm not sure how useful she is going to be outside of this faction specific, but she's really cool. I like her kit. Let's move on to the elites. All right, the only new elite ship in this banner is going to be Royal James. She is a Vanguard sailing frigate. Stat-wise, she is somewhat unique, although she reminds me of Portsmouth Adventure with her lower stats, but her main gun +1. Let's see if her skills are better than Portsmouth Adventure, hopefully. Skill number 1, she gets plus 10% firepower and hit stat. Also, 30 seconds after the start of the battle, she's going to get plus 20% damage dealt that lasts for the remainder of the battle, and then she's also going to trigger a special barrage. Nothing really too fancy here. Very generic, very basic. A little bit late because we're waiting 30 seconds into the start of the battle before we get that stuff. Skill number 2, she gets minus 20% self-damage taken. Also, when the slot 1 equipment hits an enemy, she has a 10% chance to reduce that enemy's hit stat by 10% for 5 seconds. Wow. Okay, that is so unuseful and arbitrary, really. When the ship takes damage to fall below 50% HP, she's going to heal 12% of her max HP. This triggers once per battle. I mean, 12% heal is literally less than the one that was going invincible. And then she has an all-out assault. This is 100% a collection-only ship. She is very bad. I don't know. Portsmouth Adventure is also very bad, so both of these ships, very bad. All right, the last ship of the event is another elite that goes by Adventure. Not Adventure Galley, not Portsmouth Adventure, just plain Adventure. Fortunately, she is a submarine sailing frigate, so she won't be in the same fleets as the other ones. She's also going to be obtainable by accumulating points rather than in the gacha. Interesting that we only get 1 submarine sailing frigate for this event, given that this faction started as literally all submarine sailing frigates, and that I feel like is generally what we thought the vibe was going to be. This event has just been transformed a little bit. Adventure stats are not anything to write home about. They're somewhat comparable with Wida. Wida isn't even currently used in a Tempesta fleet, so not a great start. Skill number 1, after being called into the battle, remember she's in a submarine fleet, she's going to self-heal 2% of her max HP and give a 1% evasion stat boost to herself every second for 10 seconds. So it looks unopposing, but since it's every second, she's going to get a 10% evasion stat boost basically and a 20% heal. When this ship falls below 30% of her max HP, or if this ship is afloat for 60 seconds, she's going to trigger a special barrage and then retreat. This barrage is actually very similar to Lyme's, where it has the shrapnel and has a ton of theoretical damage and has a range of like 0.1 and has a lot of question marks, but potentially could be good. There is a good chunk of healing here. It does kind of ensure she isn't dying, and if you call her over and over again, she'll heal a bunch at the start in case she starts with some damage, and then she will retreat before dying, so that's kind of actually nice. Let's move on to skill number 2. After being called to enter battle, she's going to get a plus 1% firepower and reload stat boost every second for 15 seconds, so that's a 15-second boost in the end. Every 15 seconds after entering the battle, the ship stops moving for a second and then triggers a special barrage. If the barrage sinks an enemy, you trigger a special follow-up attack. You can only do this once every 15 seconds. Enemies hit by this barrage have their speed reduced by 30% for 3 seconds. So she has 2 barrages basically if one of the barrages barrages sink somebody, and has a slow. And on top of that, she also has an all-out assault. So that's 3 different barrages we have to talk about here. The first barrage is pretty sizable. It's got a good spread of shells. Not a ton of damage necessarily, but it is a good spread, so you should be able to knock out any of the small people in a mob fleet, for example. And then the follow-up barrage is a full shrapnel. They really like these shrapnel skills. So if the shrapnel skill ends up being pretty good, then that's going to be nice and solid because she gets another one. She has skill number 1 as a shrapnel one, and then skill number 2 on the follow-up barrage could potentially have another shrapnel. And then her all-out assault is decent as well. It's actually a bomb, and it has Excel equipped to it, so that's unique, but also pretty good. So anyway, Adventure has a solid set of barrages on her. She's actually not that bad. As far as an elite goes, she's one of the better elites for Tempesta. So you could definitely use her if you want. It's going to be hard to put her in over Amity or Mary Celeste. Maybe Royal Fortune's not worth it with the Augment Module thing, but she'll eventually get an Augment Module, right? I think you're probably just going to stick with the SRs, but you could use Adventure. She's a pretty solid submarine fleet elite frigate. So that's it. That's the whole event. I think it was pretty exciting. I'm actually pretty happy with it. As far as non-major event, non-UR event goes, I think this is going to be a great one. There's a lot of things to do. We have story. We have a bunch of things to grind, including grindable equipment that we want. We get new equipment that's nice and free. We have old equipment that's being rerun. We have new cats that are exclusive and nice and good. The ships have a lot of synergy with each other. They are all real ships. And by the way, the cats are after real pirates as well. So like very much a fan of this event. I was looking forward to it and I don't think it disappointed. There were specific ships I did think disappointed. I think that Royal James and Pearl are disappointments in collection only, but you're going to want to pick up all of these ships regardless, because if you're going to use Tempesta ever, you're going to need sailing frigate fleet tech, and that is hard to come by and there's not a lot of it. So yes, collecting game is going to force you to collect, but I think the ships are really cool. The design in the kits are cool. The artwork design is cool. So I'm pretty much a fan of this event. Let me know down in the comments what your opinion of this event is, what your opinion of the ships are, any comments that you have about this event. Let me know. I'd be interested to hear them and read them, but that's it for me today. Enjoy the event. You got 2 weeks to grind this, and then we're back with another collab later next month. Take care, guys. I'll see you next time.